Greetings, everybody. It is Baba Makanjuola, and this is Pro Ori, the podcast. Today, I wanted to come in and give some backdrop to who I am, what I'm about, and what Power of Ori is all about. All right. So, first and foremost, let me explain who I am. I am a man from South Central Los Angeles that got his first hand of Ifa in 2014 and got fully initiated to Ifa in 2018. I have been practicing and been in the tradition since 2009. I frequently, not frequently, but I do readings and elbows, dafas for myself as need be. And when I do those, yes, I also have to appease the Irumale or Orishas, our ancestors. Moving towards Orieni, I found Orieni based upon something I had discovered since I've been in EFI, 2009, that was not being spoken upon, that was not being truly paid attention to. And I was an example of that and what that looks like. As that example, I had my hand in EFI, as I told you, in 2014, and I got initiated in 2018. Neither time was the curation of my Ori mentioned to me. Everything was coded, but it wasn't clear. Never was it mentioned to me about the necessity to curate my Ori. What do I mean? I began telling you that I was from South Central LA. I grew up with a mother who was a county recipient her whole life until she died in 1999. I grew up in poverty. I grew up without a father whatsoever. I had a stepfather that was pretty misogynistic. He had so many children, and a lot of children that he had while married to my mother. So I grew up in a dysfunctional background and environment. On top of that, when I went outside of my door, I grew up in South Central LA, and I was around when the gangs began to go crazy. Not when they began, but when they began to go completely crazy. And that was around the same time that the crack and all that stuff hit Los Angeles, and it was a terrible situation. Friends dying, going to jail. I'm talking about teenagers getting locked up for 25 years, like, or dying or getting shot, or you don't see them anymore. Like, it was a very traumatizing experience inside the house and outside the house. Fast forwarding again back to Oriani. I started Oriani because I hadn't heard of, like I said, the curation of Ori in this whole cosmology and concept of Ifa. I heard of it, let me be clear, but it wasn't specified what that was and what that looked like. Only thing that was specified the most was how to appease an Orisha or how to get an initiation done. After my initiation in 2018, if you haven't heard, you're gonna hear it now. If you have heard it, let me say it one more time. After my initiation, I lost my house. My wife and I broke up, and I was living with my auntie. I had to go live with my auntie. And when I left to go live with my auntie, I kind of met my grandmother on my father's side for the first time. I had seen her a few times before, but I had never, ever, ever had a conversation with her. I never ever had a chance to sit down and communicate dialogue with my grandmother on my father's side. But at this time, I'm losing my house and I lost my wife, and I'm having to stay with family until I can get back on my feet. The whole time, my grandmother, paternal grandmother, is dying in the next room. I actually held her hand as she took her last breath and went on. This is right after initiation. So during that process, I got depressed, to be honest. I'm going to provide my own self space to be vulnerable because there's not a lot of spaces for men to express how they feel in scenarios. Even in my divorce, I didn't have space to talk about how I felt, how that broke my heart, how down I felt, how depressed I got after that, how much I did love my wife at the time. Um, I didn't get a chance to express that anywhere because people don't really want to hear a grown man complain, right? Or express how they feel. So after that, I went into a depression. Didn't even know I was doing it. A friend of mine called me, heard it in my voice, called the Babalawo, called the chief. They called the Babalaos in Los Angeles and got a DAFA done for me right away. And it came back in death. When it came back in death, they did the DAFA and the elbow. Elbow was pretty big. But I had to stay in the house for 17 days. While I stayed in the house for 17 days, in my aunt's house, my grandmother died in that period. Within that 17 days, she passed away. So while I'm still in the house, I'm I'm studying, I'm going through all this stuff. There's family and stuff coming in and out of the house because of the death of my grandmother. But I'm trying to still stay focused and figure out how I'm gonna get out of this situation. But I had to stay in the house. And when I stayed in the house, I started reading books. I started reading literature on Odus. I kind of put down all of the other things. I started putting down everything that I had been taught, feeding Orishas, feeding. I kind of wasn't even doing no shade fight even. I was just kind of like just trying to just get grounded to myself again. And I kept reading these Odus, and I came up with so many Odus that spoke to the necessity of curating your Ori, fixing your Ori. Some people call it go initiate yourself. Like that's a great concept, but if you don't know what that means, you're in for a journey to figure it out. Well, luckily for me, this was my time to figure it out. So while I'm sitting in the house and I'm doing this work and trying to stay in my room out of the way of everybody, I'm studying Odus, I'm studying Odus, I'm studying Odus. And I get to these Odus that just blew my mind. It told me how important Ori was over all Orisha. It told me how important it was for your Ori to be in complete harmony in order to fulfill destiny. It told me all these different things. It's the number one deity of all deities outside of Olodumare. It told me all of these things, these Odus, that I had never heard from a Babalawo or Ianifa at the time. And in those moments, I kind of went to a space like, how does this look? How do I do that? And then it hit me. I read my own Odu, and it said, Baba, it said, Baba, look, it's not what's it's not that you're lazy, it's not that you're stupid, and it's not that you have lack of initiative, because I was good in all three of those areas. I'm not lazy, I'm very smart, and I'm a go-getter. Okay. So I wasn't in those areas. It said it's what's deeply rooted in your mind that's causing these problems in your life. And when I read that about my own Odu that I had just received not too long ago, right? I'm like, what can be deeply rooted in my mind? Hmm. Sat on that for a while. And then I was at an initiation helping some other people get initiated after I got initiated one day. And I saw the chief there and I had to talk to him about it because I just couldn't understand what that looks like. How do I get to that point? to what's rooted in my mind. And then I asked him a few questions. He talked about my anger. He talked about this, but he never asked me why I was angry. He never tried to get to the point of where that comes from. There's no babies born angry. Okay, these are learned emotional traits. So at the end of the conversation, he says, "You need to forget basically everything you've learned." I said, "So hold up. You're telling me everything that I learned growing up in South Central, I need to let go of?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "How you do that?" He just looked at me and shrugged his shoulders and went back to sleep. I said, "Wow." Now, of course, I felt offended at the time. I'm coming to you for answers, but I don't know the answers. That's why I'm coming to you. And I truly do want to fix it. I don't think anybody that gets any father does this because they don't want to fix problems in their life. Because it's too expensive, number one. You're doing things that you've never seen. You've only seen the finished products in the grocery store and the meat market. You've never seen how the meat got to the grocery store. We do those things in this stuff. I'm not going to say what it is on here. It's too many things that you're going to do as an American, particularly if you come from an urban area, that you've never seen before. So you better be dedicated to this and be with it completely. So with that being said, I looked at him. I was kind of upset at the time, and I walked out of the room feeling like I just wasted my time. But I didn't, because as I sat with the energy, I started to understand what his silence was trying to tell me. That you only can get this not from me. It's not for me to tell you. It's for you to go within yourself and see where the roots begin. That these leaves of anger that's showing up on the branches of your tree in your life, where they're being produced from. And it clicked in my head. So at that point, I started like really getting investigative about my journey. Started doing more ancestral work, and I had contacted my auntie on my mother's side that I hadn't spoke to pretty much since my mother died in '99. It was probably about a good almost 20 years since I had even spoke to them. But I called her out of the blue and I said, "Auntie, I need to talk to you. I need to understand who I am, and I don't know. I need to ask you some questions about my mother and grandmother and them." She was like, "Sure, come on over." I came over, sat down, talked to her, asked her questions about my mom. I had no idea about her. It blew my mind. Asked questions about my grandmother and my grandfather. Blew my mind. I asked questions about, matter of fact, I didn't even ask her. She went in the house and she grabbed a book, a notebook, and she said, "Read this." And I opened it, and it was some book from 1833 that one of our ancestors had written out everyone's name in the lineage on both sides. And I found out that my grandfather was born on the Nat Turner plantation in Virginia, hence his last name. Hence my grandmother's father, one of my grandmother's people were from that plantation and got sent down to Louisiana eventually, where my grandmother was born, and eventually my mother was born. And then I figured out some traits about them, and then how those traits came into my mother, and then how my mother was with us, me and my sister and brother. And it taught me how I am as Makanjuola or Jasir. So when I connected those dots, a lot of the anger started to be suppressed because I understood more about me and how this anger and why it shows up in my life that way. I say all this to say what? When you hear me talking about Orisa or Ori, but more people tend to think that Makanjuola and this Ori thing is anti-Orisha. That's not true. I've even heard that I'm anti-ancestor work. That's not true. So let me say this right now. Forgive me for conveying a message that makes you feel that I am anti any of those things, because I'm not. In order for me to be anti-Orisha or anti-ancestral work, that would mean this: I do no ebos, and that's simply not true. Because in order to do an elbow, you got to do a reading. I get readings done. I get dafas done. And when I do dafas, I do the elbow. And when you do the elbow, you're going to feed a deity, or inclusively, or you're going to be feeding your Ori, which is a deity. But when we talk about Orisha, you're going to feed an Orisha or a Rumala. There's no reading without an offering. So, for me to be anti Orisha or anti ancestral work, that would mean that I don't do dafas then. I just think I know it all and get it done on my own. I just went through an initiation process for no reason. That's not real. So I may have, I'll say this about myself. I do know this. My Ogbe Yonu energy, my Pisces energy, my Pisces passion, my Shango energy. Look, I'm using that Orisha, right? My Shango energy, which is all through my Odu, tends to come across as aggressive, opinionated, and angry. Again, what's the roots to all of that, right? But I'm here telling you on this podcast today, which is kind of the reason why I made this Powerful Read podcast. Because I really want to get this message conveyed, not just through me, but through other respected people in this tradition. But at the end of the day, I am not anti Orisha. I am not anti ancestral work. What I am anti is the over um, usage, mentioning, I won't say celebrating, but the over usage of the Orisha without Ori curation. I'm even anti initiation without Ori curation. I just told you my story. And I always say to myself that I basically initiated my crazy. Everything I had learned in that dysfunctional household, everything that I learned in South Central LA, that's what I initiated. See, I always had my old dude my whole life. I just didn't know it. But my old dude was in a Yewo or a Sogbo for what if you practice something differently. It was not in a good light because I learned this function. When you come into Ifa, I tell people all the time that come into Oriani, if you are not willing to put down what you have learned in your life in the past and where you came from, this is not for you. You have to be willing to put down what you think you know in order to learn something new. And that's what I had to be faced with. And that's the reason why I created Oriani, because I want to help people to see the significance of doing Ori work. It's not always glorified. It's not always pretty at all. It's probably the hardest thing you're ever going to do, because I know it was for me. To look yourself in the mirror like that behind me and be like, this is me, raw, naked, love me or leave me. This is me. And a lot of people, like myself, when you look in the mirror for the first time, you're not even gonna like yourself, and you're gonna wonder how anybody else have loved you ever in life at times. Because I knew when I looked at myself, I looked saw the raw me. I was like, bro, you got some stuff to fix. Anger is an emotion. Somebody asked me earlier, what's the difference between feelings and emotion? Do you see them the same? And I told them I don't really deal with feelings too much. And she was like, what's the difference between those two? I said, let me explain. This is just my interpretation. This is not Ifa. This is my interpretation. I say feeling is the intake of an experience. If I touch a stove and my hand feels like it's burning, that's the intake. The sensation of that burn is being sent to my mind to make a decision. Pull your hand away or fry your hand. Of course, it's going to react and flee and get away from it. That feeling sent the reactional vibration to my mind. The emotional aspect is what I do after my mind processes it. After I take it off and now the burning sensation kicks in, how do I respond? Do I start cursing things out? Do I just run to some cold water immediately and try to douse the fire in my hand? Do I blame somebody else for leaving the stove on? Like, what do I do? Being able to separate the feeling from the emotion and then injecting logic into the room is the Ori work. When somebody cheats on you, somebody mistreats you, somebody does anything that you don't like and you cuss them out, you inflict violence on them, you give them the finger in traffic because they cut you off. We're all human. We get angry at times, right? But that feeling that made you have that emotional response is something deeply rooted in your mind, as I told you before, that's making you do that. It's not an Orisha. It's not none of these. It's not an ancestor. Maybe you had an ancestor though that had the same issue that you have not discovered yet, and you're responding just like they would have, and they gave you the baton as you entered this world, but you haven't figured out where you're getting it from, but you're still doing it, and you're justifying it because you want to justify and identify with the trait of an Orisha that matches what you're doing. You don't change it by doing that. You change it by doing the Ori work, and the Ori work looks like you identifying that thing for what it is, facing it for what it is, and evolving from it. I'm not going to give you the whole acronym. That's going to say that for my classes. But for me, FACES is an acronym for something that will help you to shift through those energies and figure out how that works. Now, an Orisha will aid you. They will assist you. Orishas exist in the odus that we receive, and they assist those odus and people with those odus because they've had issues in their living life with those same issues that they mastered. That's why they're there. If an odu has something talking about a march, then it probably would have Martin Luther King mentioned all in it, right? Because he was the master marcher. You know what I mean? So it's the same thing with Orisha. Listen, I'm here to tell you this. Baba Makanjuola is not anti-Orisha. It's been misunderstood. It's been misinterpreted and misunderstood. No one's really come to me and asked me that question, but I'm hearing it in the streets now. So I thought I would make this video to address this. I am not anti-Orisha for the record. I am not anti-ancestor for the record. My mother is right here on the mantle behind me. So I'm not that. Eshu is right over there. Ifa is right over there. I'm not anti any of it. But what I do understand is that they're here to help me, not do it for me. They're here to assist in my journey, not do it for me. And that can only be done through a rework. That's all I'm saying. That's what the Odu say, not what Makanjuola says. It's what the Odu says. If we're going to sit here and deny the Odu, then that's a whole nother conversation. But the Odu doesn't change for anyone because neither one of us has written an Odu, right? That's Orumula's job. That's why we praise Ifa. So, with that being said, I want this to be known once and for all. I am not anti-Orisha. I am not anti-ancestral work. I am very pro Ori, but I do believe that the Orisha and ancestors will assist the Ori throughout its journey in this life. Now, here's what I'll do. If there's anybody who wants to come on the podcast and have a discussion about this, I'm so open to it. Let's do it. Because you might be able to hear me from a different perspective and see it. And I will produce the odus that I'm speaking of. And you can see what I'm talking about. Makanjuola says he doesn't go with emotions for this one reason. Because emotions will have you believing in human beings, not the odu. Emotions will have you believing that somebody tells you something and that's the law. But if you've never asked them what the Odu is and they never revealed it to you, you're basically believing what somebody else just has to tell you. And if we didn't learn any messages from coming out of the church, then we have a whole nother situation to deal with because we should know by now. We can't just listen to the pastor or the priest. We got to get it from the word, the word from the horse's mouth, and that is Arumala's mouth. And Arumala's mouth is the Odu. I get it from the Odu. Period. If you can't produce the Odu for me that proves what you're talking about, that is what you do and what you guys have made a tradition, Isheshe for you. Isheshe is just tradition. My tradition is your different tradition. Households have different traditions. Hey, that's too impossible to embody across the world and make everybody follow it. That's impossible. But at the end of the day, Ori work is for Ori work, and that's universal. And when you're in harmony with your Ori, the Orisha can then truly assist you. If you're not in harmony and not doing the work with you, they can assist you in spurts, but they will not be there for you consistently. And that's a real thing that's stated in the oath. Again, if you are willing to have a pleasant conversation about this, I am open to it. You can DM me, you can email me at no, that's the wrong one. I'm sorry. You can email me at grow@oriane.com. That's GROW at oriane.com. Okay? Email me there. We will set a date. We will have the discussion, a pleasant discussion. And let me say that again. We're not here to debate. We're just here to get to the nitty gritty. All right? I wanted you all to know this from me. I am not anti-Orisha. So who's ever spreading those words about Baba Makanjuola, they are wrong. It's probably how they receiving my message. Whatever's in their Ori is making them digest my message with that conclusion. That's okay. That's up to them. But I'm here to say from my mouth to yours ears is that I am not anti-Orisha. That would mean that I do, like I said, no elbows. I just I do Iboris all day long and just sit up and wait for them to happen. Like, no, I have ancestors. I have an altar. I have Orishas that are in my Odu that I must appease at times. Like, come on, man. It's a whole pie, y'all. It's called Ifa, and the whole pie consists of Ori and Orishas in it too. Trust me, I understand that. I hope y'all understand that now. With that being said, if you ever need any information about Ori, and if you ever want to inquire about powerofori.com and what we do here, please just go to the website, powerofori.com, and check it out. You can set up a consultation, and I'll be happy to help anyone. All right? I am Makanjuola. Appreciate you for watching. God bless.